BBC Radio York.
Yeah, plain and simple this morning. Do you think fracking should be allowed or not allowed in the North York Moors National Park? Fracking is banned within its borders. This process of forcing down a mixture of water and other chemicals to fracture the rock to release the gas. So you cannot frack within the boundaries, within the borders of the national park. But there are now some concerns that it could take place underneath the national park by going in sideways, effectively, as I say, drilling in from the outside and then going in at right angles to see whether the gas is down there. Ineos, which has licences on the southern edge of the park, are looking to prepare applications to drill what they describe as exploratory boreholes. That has alarmed the bosses of the national park, who want an urgent meeting with this international firm. Well, we've been asking people in Helmsley how they feel about the prospect of this happening.
Don't agree with it at all. Leave Yorkshire alone. It's a lovely county, but it won't be for much longer if they keep doing all the things they're doing, you know?
National parks are sacrosanct. They're there for the people and not for business and profit. And there are other places that can be tackled first.
I'm not as concerned about that as most local people. Sometimes you've got to take one for the country. I think for the economy, strategically, it's very important that it happens. Unfortunately for North Yorkshire, the resources are here. If the resources were elsewhere, I suspect the people here wouldn't be too bothered.
I think it shouldn't be allowed, to be honest.
I think that we need it. There has been industry in terms of lead mining and all sorts of other mining in national parks for centuries.
I think it's a completely dreadful idea. The potential impact upon the environment, because there are a lot of unknowns, the impact upon the tourism, just the whole concept of what could happen in such a beautiful area. I just can't imagine why anybody would allow a company to go and do that sort of thing under such a wonderful area. I'm afraid it just doesn't make sense to me.
Voices against and voices for. Where do you stand? 01904 641 641, for or against allowing Ineos to do the exploratory fracking underneath the North York Moors National Park. Call me, 01904 641 641. And have your say this morning. Listening to that and joining us now is Tom Chadwick. Mr. Chadwick is the chair of the North Yorkshire Moors Association, which campaigns to protect the national park. Is that a fair thing to say, Mr. Chadwick?
Good morning. Yes, it certainly is a fair thing to say. And, of course, you've got to remember that national parks are areas of the countryside that should have the highest level of protection from any kind of intrusion of this sort. And certainly fracking should not take place underneath the national park, because basically it is really amounts to a major development within the national park, and there is a presumption against major development.
But it's not within. That's the point, isn't it? It's it's underneath, and we've got a statement here. I'm looking at what Ineos say. They say they can drill underneath the park without impacting on the surface above. They also say they want to do a geological survey to build up a 3D picture of the rock strata before drilling test wells to see where they can best extract shale gas. They're making all the reassuring noises that surely someone like yourself should take on board.
Yeah, well, they will make reassuring noises, and of course there are other aspects to this as well. First of all, it is permitted under planning regulations for companies to drill underneath national parks. There is no question about that. They're not allowed to put surface structures there, but certainly they're allowed to do that, except, of course, that it would constitute major development. And there is always, of course, the risks that accompany fracking, and some of these have been evident from the fracking that's already taken place, and that is that there is a risk of seismic activity from the fracking. There is also risks from the intrusion of pollutants and water into aquifers and into the circulating groundwater areas as well. So, no, it is not without risk, and I think that some of those risks are just too much to be taking place within such a protected area.
Of course, when you turn to some experts, they will express a contrary opinion. Have a listen to this. This is Professor Richard Davies. He's a petroleum geologist at Newcastle University. He says that the national park is unlikely to be adversely affected by this. Let's just take a listen to what he's told us.
The drilling rig would be there for a month or two. The fracking would take a couple of weeks. And then if gas was produced, actually the visual impact is quite low because the engineering required is the size of a Christmas tree. It's actually called a Christmas tree, and it would sit there producing gas.
Simply the size of a Christmas tree. Do you take on board the reassurance that Professor Davies offers?
Well, I think there's some confusion here between what is conventional gas exploration, which seems to be what he's talking about, rather than fracking. I mean, fracking requires well pads and an enormous number of well pads to do any kind of substantial fracking. I mean, the well pads can take up to 1.9 hectares. For 10 wells. This is an intensive drilling activity, and while that may take place outside of the national park, and it can only take place outside of the national park, then the proximity of some of these to the national park may well affect people who are coming and travelling into the national park. It is certainly likely to have an impact on tourism because around these well sites there are a massive number of heavy goods vehicle movements and so on. So really we're talking about not only underneath the national park, we're talking about the setting of the national park as well, and those delightful areas that string out along the boundaries of the national park and which draw people in from all over West Yorkshire and way beyond that as well.
Not everybody, of course, is dead set against it. I mean, on our little vox pop that you'll have heard while you were waiting on the line there was one gentleman who said sometimes because of the resources you've got to take one for the country. There was another lady who pointed out that there have been, industrial processes going on in the national park before now. There have been lime kilns and iron ore extraction and quarries. And she said, I think we need it.
Well, I that people are obviously entitled to their views, but in 1949 it was thought that this country required some relief from industrial areas, and access to the countryside, and the National Park Act came as a result of that. And since that time, we've had, fortunately, 13 beautiful national parks preserved over that lengthy period of time since, in the case of North Yorkshire, since 1952, and long may that last, because industrial intrusion in the national park is just simply unacceptable.
Are you just going to put your foot down and say no, whatever reassurances people who are experts in the industry or simply experts in the field of gas extraction say?
Well, the reassurances that are made simply don't always hold up, and they would be the first people to say there are risks, and those risks are not worth taking.
Tom Chadwick, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Tom Chadwick, Chair of the North Yorkshire Moors Association. There are risks, and those risks are simply not worth taking, is his stance on this. Maybe you take a different point of view, or maybe you agree with him. I'd just like to hear what you think. 01904 641 641. Should exploration for shale gas, I mean, that's the stage we're at. They're not even talking about drilling for it. They're just talking about doing a seismic survey, and then, depending on what they discover about the rock strata underneath the North York Moors National Park, maybe putting a test rig in there with, they say, very minimal impact on the environment, drilling from outside the park, down and then across at right angles underneath the park to see whether the shale gas is there. Would that be okay with you? 01904 641 641. Susan is on the line from Haxby this morning. Good morning, Susan.
Good morning.
Hi, what's your view?
Well, I definitely, we've spoken before. And
we have, I reckon, remember your voice.
Yeah, and I'm really against it anywhere, but especially here. I've just been looking at the list of villages that could be affected by this, and it's absolutely enormous, right from Helmsley right through to Great Ayton, because they will put all the wells outside the park. So as your caller was saying, it will affect tourism, because people have got to go through there, and to say that they're not going to be visible, as Ineo says, I think is... Well, I don't think that's going to happen.
Really? I mean, they know that the sensitivity about this. They're not stupid people. They know how sensitive people are in the area, those who oppose fracking. Surely to goodness they will have the wit, if they discover large quantities of shale gas, to realise that if they're going to go ahead and drill for it, they're going to have to be so discreet about what they do that it has a minimal impact on the environment, so it doesn't damage our important tourist industry.
Well, yeah, you would hope so. But, I mean, the number of wells that they're talking about, is hundreds. They're talking about, in each area of 6 miles, they're going to have between 10 and 15 fracking pads. If you've seen the photographs of the pad at Kirby Misperton, you can't hide them. Some you might be able to because of the trees and things, but most of them you won't be able to. And as has been said, it's all the hundreds of lorry movements that will have to go to take water in, to take the fracking fluid away when they've finished, which is highly dangerous. And, and also Ineos have said, which doesn't get mentioned, that they are not actually going to put this energy into the grid. The gas is going to be used in their factories to make more plastic. And as has been discussed on the breakfast show this morning, plastic is polluting our environment. We don't need any more plastic.
So you even question the need to extract this source of energy?
Well, exactly. We don't need more plastic. And anyway, there's government reports and everything that say that we can get enough gas for our needs. We don't need to get more. In their energy scenario for the future, they haven't mentioned fracking at all. They have said that we need to get away from gas because of climate change. So why are they going ahead with fracking? Because fracking will actually cause more damage to more global warming than carbon dioxide. Methane is far more powerful. So apart from anything else, even if they could hide it, even if it would not impact on our tourism, it will affect climate change. And there's so many scientific and other reports out now saying that if the climate change is actually critical, and if we don't do everything we can to lessen the impact, it's going to have huge effects on everybody.
Susan, thank you very much indeed. Susan on the line from Haxby this morning. Anne is in Helmsley. Good morning, Anne.
Oh, good morning, Jonathan. I'm everything in agreement with Susan that she's just said. The Ineos have licences right the way from Helmsley to East Ayton, and that is right the way along the main A170 road, which is used by tourists and holiday makers. There's lots of farms, an organic farm on route there, and all this would be hugely affected because, as Sue said, the amount of fracking pads that they're planning would need a huge amount of infrastructure support with wagons and deliveries of fresh water, taking wastewater away.
But at the moment, what we're talking about, I know it perhaps could in the long term lead to what you've just described, but at the moment, all we're talking about is the exploratory stage.
Yeah, but if the exploratory stage goes ahead and they find gas, this is what Tom Pickering has proposed, that this is what it would result in. And so, they're not going to spend money, I don't think, doing a lot of exploration if they haven't got plans to produce gas. And I think it would absolutely ruin the area. A lot of people say that we're NIMBYs around here, but we're not. Fracking is just not needed anywhere in this country. And Ineos are such an arrogant company that they're even challenging the ban now that, the moratorium that's in Scotland. They seem to be so desperate to get started. And so I just think it's just totally unnecessary, and it goes against the climate change problems that we've got at the moment.
Anne, good to hear from you this morning. Anne on the line from Helmsley with her opinion. We've heard from 2 people this morning who are dead set against the idea. Actually, 3 people, haven't we? We've heard from 3 people who are dead set against the idea of Ineos, the exploration company, going ahead and being allowed to find out whether there is a resource of shale gas underneath the national park. Maybe you feel differently. There is often criticism that it is the voice of those who are anti-fracking, who are opposed to the idea, who shout the loudest and get the most attention. This programme is not about that. This programme is about giving everybody the right to have their say. So if you think that the national park, as long as Ineos can do it without damaging anything, which is what they reassure people they can do, if you think they ought to be allowed to go ahead and do it and extract this natural resource, I'm more than happy to hear from you. 01904 641 641 is the number to call. Carl on Twitter says, we do not need to exploit it at all. He's talking about shale gas, regardless of the location. No, more money should be placed into renewable energy, says Carl this morning. Sally on Twitter, Greenbelt Sal, morning Sally, says, do we need fracking underneath the national park? Should it be allowed to go ahead? No. Bad enough, she says, that they're allowing potash mining. Is nothing safe from human greed? After all the devastation worldwide weather-wise, when will all the movers and shakers do something good for the green environment? And Chris on Twitter says, hello JC, hello Chris. The national park should be protected on the ground, above and underneath, like it is in Canada. Well, the time is just coming round to 25 minutes to 10. Let's go back to the phones and see what you have to say on the subject of the idea that exploration for shale gas, not actually fracking, but just the exploration to see if it's there, should be allowed to go ahead underneath the North York Moors National Park. Let's go to East Ayton, and Sheila is on the line. Good morning, Sheila.
Good morning.
How do you feel about the prospect of it? Is it okay with you or not?
I'm unhappy about it. I know something must be done, but I still think that there are possibly other ways.
When you say something must be done, what do you mean? Do you mean in a search for new forms of energy?
Absolutely. I think that there should be there's enough research goes into it. But please don't dig our North York Moors up. Please.
Well, Ineos say they've got no intention of doing that. They want to, I'm sure if we had a spokesperson for Ineos here this morning, they would reassure us that they're going to do it as discreetly and in as an environmentally friendly way as they possibly can.
Well, my question, Jonathan, is all these tracts of land, and it's told to us quite regularly, were all granted licences to do this. I want to know who granted them. Where did they come from?
The government.
Who were they? When was it done? Why weren't we told at the time?
Well, I think we were told at the time. Perhaps we just didn't realise the significance of it. I mean, it's like a lot of these things, We'll report that the government have granted licences for X, Y and Z, and some people did put their head above the parapet at the time and say, hang on a minute, we're not very happy about that. But for the majority of people, it's just one of those passing things. Oh, a licence has been granted. It doesn't sound very dramatic or very exciting, but it was reported at the time. And it just didn't mean a lot to many people until you start to flesh it out, I suppose, and say, and this is what the reality of the licences could mean. But the answer to your question is the government granted the exploration licences to look for minerals, to look for energy resources, minerals of other sorts. It's a general licence that permits a company to look underground.
I think it's sneaky. I just do. I'm sorry. That's just my opinion. But all right, I grant you that licences have to be given for things like this. But it just seems that all of a sudden these licences have been granted. All these people have kept quiet about this, put them under the desk, left them there until this will be a time when we can use these, and suddenly here they all are. All licences are granted. I'm just wondering if anyone applied now, what licences would be granted now?
There are licences all over the place. I mean, there really are multiple.
Very scary, Jonathan. We don't know, do we?
Why? Well, I mean, if you choose to find out, you can look at maps, you can see where the licences are. They're all over the country. They're all around the city of York, for example, in perhaps areas where people listening to this morning are thinking to themselves, well, this is happening out in the rural areas. No, it's happening up to and into the city boundaries as well, I believe.
Yeah.
So they are in a lot of places where the government has said, OK, if you're a mineral or energy exploration firm, you have a licence to go ahead and do this if you think you can make money out of it.
Well, that's all it's about is money, isn't it?
That's a very cynical thing to say. I mean, I'm sure that the experts in the field would say it's about finding new resources, new sources of energy.
Perhaps I'm cynical anyway, but I'm sorry. I just wanted the question answered, and thank you for answering it for me.
And don't ever apologise for a dose of cynicism on this programme. It's what it thrives on. Thank you very much indeed, Sheila. Nice to speak to you.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye. Sheila in East Ayton, who is, perhaps like a lot of people, a little bit cynical about the whys and wherefores of the granting of the licences in the first place and the motives of the people who applied for them and got them. Sue is on the line from Newton-on-Rawcliffe. Good morning, Sue.
Good morning.
Hi. What's your thoughts about this?
Well, my thoughts are fracking is a very bad idea, and the company, Ineo, who want to do it in my area, they have said in the past, not so long ago, that they would not be putting the frack gas into the national grid. It'll be going to make plastics. Now, this is a very big problem in the world now. And one of the plastics they make are these little granules, which get into the sea and cause a lot of problem. The lady was on about the license. I've got a copy here of the PEDAL license. It stands for Petroleum Exploration and Development Licenses in North Yorkshire. And Ineos, this company, they're quite ruthless. They don't really care about the area. I've got a copy here of a report that they put into the Times on December the 31st. They said that if gas is found, this is below south of the parks. If gas is found in each licence area of 6 by 6 miles, Ineos would build between 10 and 15 fracking pads and drill up to 10 well pads from each pad. Since any shale gas reserves under the moor potentially spread across 600 square miles, this would mean hundreds of fracking pads, each the size of a football field, and could eventually be needed. Now, this area where they want to do all these wells is fairly close to the A170, which stretches from Helmsley to Scarborough. Now, that is a road. There are a lot of accidents on it already, and whilst fracking pads are being built and then serviced later on with chemicals and wastewater, and the wastewater removed, there will be hundreds and hundreds of tankers on the road. Now, there are 3 large schools along that area, and it's a bus route. And part of the area, we sometimes have the Tour de Yorkshire come through this part of Yorkshire. And it would be catastrophic for the tourism industry, which is worth over £1 billion, and agriculture. We've got some of our prime agricultural land around here.
There's nothing anyone can say, is there, that is ever, I suspect, judging by how well briefed you appear to be on this subject, I don't think there's anything anybody's ever going to say that is going to convince you that fracking is okay, or even the exploration to see if shale gas is there.
No, it won't, because this company, Ineos, they are now trying to overturn the Scottish government's ban on fracking. That is just what we're dealing with. They won't give up, but we won't give up either. And I just don't want to see this area ruined for future generations who might say, well, why didn't you do something? We are trying to do something. We don't want it, and we don't need it. And we certainly don't need more plastics.
Sue, thank you for your call this morning. Sue on the line from Newton-on-Rawcliffe. As I say, you may take a different stance on this. We've now heard exclusively this morning from people who object to the idea. I should tell you the team have been working extremely hard behind the scenes to try and find someone willing to express a contrary view. And the people that we've contacted who have previously been pro-fracking, in favour of the fracking process or even the exploration, for shale gas are either unavailable to speak this morning or unwilling to speak this morning. So we are trying to bring you a balanced picture and at least hear from one person before we're done at 10 o'clock. Deb says there are no guaranteed assurances regarding fracking. We don't know the long-term effects of fracking on our UK infrastructure. If the national park can't be dug on as it is protected land, this must include the land underneath the surface. So let's get legal clarity, says Debs this morning. And she goes on, I agree with the speakers who feel we don't need fracking in North Yorkshire because of the risk to our environment. I would prefer more investment in renewable energy, wind, wave and hydro technology. No, she says, because of contamination of groundwater, methane pollution and its impact on climate change, air pollution impacts, exposure to toxic chemicals, blowouts due to gas explosions, waste disposal, large volumes of water use in water-deficient regions, fracking-induced earthquakes. Whew. Debs, thank you very much indeed for all of that. We have had one response this morning that comes from Philip, which is very brief. It's an email that says, Morning, JC. If they, and I assume he means Ineos by this, if they can do what they say they can do, then why not? Imagine the reaction, he says, if coal had just been discovered and the first few visitors to Yorkshire got was slag heaps and winding gear. More of your emails this morning. This one's from Stuart. Morning, Stuart. Says, Dear Jonathan, I have studied the Ineos licence areas in Yorkshire and I am concerned for the towns and villages on the southern edge of the national park where the drilling and fracking will take place. In a recent Times article, says Stuart, it was stated that Ineos were looking for up to 10 sites. He says, I agree with Anne. This year's Tour de Yorkshire will pass through Helmsley and on through Pickering towards Scarborough, which are the very areas that Ineos want to place their drilling rigs. Would the organisers choose this area in future? All its attraction would be lost, I fear, says Stuart. Thank you for your email. Jonathan@bbc.co.uk is the email address. Barry is on the line from Thirsk. Good morning, Barry.
Morning, Jonathan.
Should they allow the fracking companies to explore from outside? I mean, it's not within the boundaries of the national park. That's not permitted to explore, to drill down hundreds of metres, test wells and then drill sideways and see if there's shale gas underneath the park?
Most definitely not, Jonathan. I'm against any industrialisation of North Yorkshire. It gives a bad image of oil rigs and all sorts. That's what people think in their minds, whether it's like that or not. But the fact is, the person who, as the previous caller mentioned just a few minutes ago, it was David Cameron from his constituency in Witney, Oxfordshire. It definitely wouldn't be happening in his patch, would it? It wouldn't be happening on Theresa May's patch either, or Stockbroker Belt, sorry. But yes, stuff it up here where it's out of their way and not affecting them.
Well, isn't it a question of where the shale gas actually is? And we just happen to have the geology that produces the shale gas.
Well, it may have the geology and so on and producing it, but the fact is the programmes I've seen don't look very good at all. I haven't seen anything that would convince me, and I'm against it. And the USA is a big country. This is a small country. I don't like to envisage oil places every few miles, every 3-4 miles apart, which could end up that way. There could be hundreds of these areas where it's happening across North Yorkshire.
What do you say to the gentleman who's a gentleman with a strong northeastern accent in our little vox pop earlier on when we asked people in the Helmsley area about what they thought about it? And he was one of a couple of positive voices. There was a well-spoken lady who said, I think that we need it, and she referred to the fact that there has been industrial development in what is now a national park, but in years gone by, the lime kilns and the iron extraction or whatever. But that gentleman said, sometimes you've got to take one for the country. Effectively, it may be a blow, a major or minor blow to North Yorkshire, but if we are lucky or unlucky enough, depending on how you view it, to have this particular natural resource, then doesn't it fall to us to let the nation exploit it here?
No, this is mining. And yes, mining took place in the moors and the dales and everywhere, and you can see the spoil heaps they're still there. And it does create a wrong image. People, this is a tourist area and an agricultural area. It's all right. The USA is a big country. They can produce it for next to nothing. And where it's taking place, people aren't getting a good return on the money that they were promised anyway, because it's being produced so cheaply. So you can get it from the USA, no problem. We don't need it here on our patch anyway. We're here to attract tourists and agriculture, not to give an image of industrialization. That's my view on it, and I don't see any. As I say, the programs I've seen of fracking in the USA, the people there weren't happy with it at all.
Well, yeah, and it depends whose version of the story of what happened in the USA you actually take on board. There are two very powerful films, neither of which I can remember the title of at the moment, I'm afraid, but one is strongly pro-fracking and one is strongly anti-fracking, and you watch them both, and I've said this on air before now, and I emerge at the end, whether I'm a bear of very little brain on this kind of thing, but I emerge convinced by the strength of the argument that both films give. It's difficult for the regular person, I think, to work it out sometimes.
Well, we've got to be cautious about this, and we've got to err on the side of safety and so on. It's all right for these companies. They're there to make a profit. They don't give us stuff about here. That's all they're after, money and their investors. That's all they're interested in. They don't give us stuff about the people who live here.
Barry, thank you very much. Barry on the line from Thirsk. If somebody from Ineos is listening to this online somewhere, or maybe just over a regular radio here in North Yorkshire, and you want to respond to what you've heard this morning, which has been a huge dose of cynicism and anti-fracking feeling about what you are hoping to do on the borders of the national park, and you want to come on the programme this morning and respond, you're welcome to do so. Carl on Twitter this morning says, we do not need to exploit it at all, regardless of the location. More money should be placed into renewable energy, which is what Arctic Fox, Greenbelt Sal's been saying and Debs has been saying on Twitter this morning. And perhaps not surprisingly, getting a lot of reaction from the Frack Free Rydale Twitter account this morning, who say, and all the police, how much is it costing the taxpayers to provide security for a private company that's based in the Caymans, they say this morning. Thank you very much indeed for that. Alan from Filey sends me quite a long email this morning. I'll just make a couple of the points that Alan makes. Morning, Jonathan. He says, number one, they wouldn't pay for exploratory drilling unless they knew gas was there. So this harmless-sounding exploratory drilling is establishing for the firm a precedent to drill full-time. Two, he says, ask Americans how good fracking is with earth tremors and permanently poisoned water. There can be no harm caused. You're taking something out, leaving a void which creates sinkholes, says Alan. Number three, fracking doesn't lower gas bills. The gas taken is sold on the market. It doesn't get used by the locals. And we've seen that an increase of gas supply doesn't lower gas bills. It increases profits for gas firms. And I'll just go to his point number four. Doesn't anyone else consider this firm behaving dishonestly? They can't drill on the national park, so they're drilling next to it and then under it. If they're happy to brazenly flout the spirit of the law, then are they trustworthy? Can you believe what they say when they say there is no harm caused? We're just taking a peek. Thank you very much indeed, Alan from Filey this morning. Email address for the show, if you've got more to say, is jonathan@bbc.co.uk.
BBC News at 10 o'clock. Good morning, I'm Nathan Turvey. National Park bosses say they're very worried about plans by Ineos to explore for shale gas under the North York moors and are holding another urgent meeting with them this week to discuss their concerns. Companies aren't allowed to frack in national parks, but they can drill underneath them from outside the area. Tom Chadwick is chair of the North Yorkshire Moors Association, which campaigns to protect the national park. He told Jonathan that drilling from outside the park would still have a massive impact on the area and people living within it.
This is an intensive drilling activity. While that may take place outside of the national park, then the proximity of some of these to the national park may well affect people who are coming and travelling into the national park. It is certainly likely to have an impact on tourism.
Well, Ineos says it can drill underneath the national park without impacting on the surface above.
This comes from Bill. This is Bill Kitson, the North Yorkshire author, who says, "Hi JC, morning Bill, and Happy New Year to you and yours." He says fracking will undermine the geological structure of huge tracts of North Yorkshire. That is indisputable, and having read the account of mudslides in California, he says, I checked online and found that the area affected by this tragedy was close to Santa Barbara, which was where fracking has taken place. He says maybe the fracking didn't contribute directly to that tragedy, but it is a sobering reminder of the fragility of our infrastructure, and I think it's time that people's concerns were addressed rather than the relentless and ruthless pursuit of profit. We already have old mine workings from exploration of lead, coal and other minerals. And Bill says further disturbance of the underground subsystem could be catastrophic. Bill, thank you very much indeed for that. Please do get in touch on the phone, text, email. Thank you very much indeed for your emails and your correspondence on the subject of fracking this morning. Some people are keeping it beautifully simple. This comes from Linda, who says, "Hi Jonathan, hello. Do the government ever listen? The gas," says Linda, "is going to be used to make plastic." She says, "We're supposed to be stopping using plastics due to the environmental impact of this product. When will we ever learn?" Asks Linda in an email to jonathan@bbc.co.uk. This morning. And another very simple one comes from June. Good morning, June. Says, I don't know whereabouts June is. She says, "We live in a unique national park. Moorland, sea and farmland. Fracking would destroy this wonderful place of peace and quiet. Thank you," says June this morning. That's her take on it, and just expresses it very, very simply. On the email, on the text this morning, Brian says, "We're all the ambassadors for Yorkshire." Where? Maybe he says, where are all the ambassadors for Yorkshire? He says, "Our MPs and the government is not listening to the normal protester. Do we really want to see wells on the Tour de Yorkshire? It's time to step up and get rid of fracking once and for all," says Brian in York. Thank you for that. And Linda in York says, "Hello, my gut feeling is this is so wrong. The earth manages to cope on its own to keep us all supported well." Linda says, "You can't tell me if these companies look and find they won't drill no matter where it is. In the big picture is so short term. Harness what we have," says Linda this morning. "Wind, water and sun without damaging the earth." Thank you very much indeed. There's a lot of passion goes into people's opinions on this subject, and I had a feeling we needed a further outlet for it this morning, so thank you for everybody that's been in touch this morning. If there's more to say, I know that we're going to be coming back to this story this morning, both in regards to the fracking at Kirkby Misperton and the proposal to frack outside the national park and then underneath the national park.